For 12 years, Naomi Carter took care of a blind mafia boss no one dared to speak about. He never spoke to her. Never moved. Never once acknowledged that she existed. Until one night. Exactly at midnight. When the house went silent. And he spoke. If you want stories with twists this dark, subscribe. Because what he says next changes everything. By the time Naomi Carter reached the gates each morning, the world had already decided who she was. A black woman in worn scrubs. Too quiet. Too heavy. Too ordinary to be noticed, except when someone needed something done for them. She learned early that the safest way to exist was to be useful, invisible, and reliable. And for 12 years, she had been all three. The estate sat high above the city, sealed off behind black iron gates and private security that never smiled. Naomi never lingered outside. She checked in, surrendered her phone, and followed the same stone path every single day. Left turn at the fountain. Right at the west wing. No shortcuts. No curiosity. Inside, the mansion was always silent. Not peaceful, controlled. The kind of quiet that pressed against your ears and reminded you that power lived here, even when it wasn't speaking. At the end of the corridor sat the man everyone whispered about and no one dared to name out loud. Mr. Calderon. A blind mafia boss who hadn't walked in years. Some said a stroke took his sight. Others said it was punishment, either from rivals or from God. Naomi never asked. She was hired to care for him, not understand him. Every morning, she found him exactly where she left him the night before. Seated by the window. Hands resting still on the armrests. Eyes open, unfocused, staring at nothing. He never greeted her. Never reacted. Never acknowledged that she existed at all. And yet, she spoke to him anyway. She explained the weather as she opened the curtains. Described the meals as she prepared them. Announced every movement before touching him. Lifting an arm, adjusting a collar, guiding a spoon. Not because he asked. Because she believed dignity mattered, even when no one was watching. The routine never changed. Breakfast at 7. Medication at 7:30. Physical therapy at 8, slow and careful. The same chair. The same window. The same silence. To the guards, she was background noise. To the house, she was part of the furniture. To the man in the wheelchair, she was nothing more than a shadow that passed through his days. And Naomi accepted that, because the world had taught her not to expect more. What she didn't know was that routines don't just hide comfort. They hide secrets. By the second year, Naomi could have done the job with her eyes closed. She knew how many steps it took from the service door to his room. She knew the exact moment the floor changed from marble to carpet. She knew how long it took the kettle to cool to the temperature he preferred. Warm, never hot. The routine wasn't written anywhere. It lived in her body. Every morning, she greeted him the same way. "Good morning, Mr. Calderon." No response. She moved slowly, deliberately, narrating every action like she'd been trained to do. She adjusted his blanket. Checked his pulse. Tilted the wheelchair toward the light. The man never flinched. Never breathed differently. Never acknowledged her presence. That was how it had always been. Until one morning, it wasn't. Naomi was certain she'd left his wheelchair angled slightly away from the window the night before. She always did, so the glare wouldn't bother his eyes. But when she entered the room, the chair faced the glass directly. Perfectly centered. Exactly how it had been years ago, before she learned his preferences. She stared at it for a second too long. Maybe one of the guards moved him. That had to be it. She corrected the angle and continued her work, telling herself not to overthink something so small. But small things started happening more often. A cup she swore she'd placed on the left side of the tray appeared on the right. His fingers rested differently than she remembered after she stepped out to retrieve medication. Once, she caught herself pausing mid-sentence because she felt like someone was listening. The silence began to feel attentive. Still, nothing ever happened when she looked directly at him. His eyes remained unfocused. His body slack. The picture of helplessness the world expected him to be. So Naomi told herself the truth she'd always relied on. She was tired. She worked too much. Loneliness played tricks on the mind. Yet the doubts crept in anyway. She started double-checking things. memorizing positions, testing herself, leaving the room exactly as she found it, just to see. One afternoon, she placed his right hand carefully on the armrest, palm down, fingers relaxed. She made a mental note of it before stepping into the bathroom to run water. When she returned less than a minute later, his fingers were curled inward. Just slightly. Naomi froze. Her heart thudded loud enough that she was sure the guards could hear it outside the door. She stared at his hand, waiting for it to move again. Waiting for proof. Waiting for something. Nothing happened. She slowly released the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding and gently straightened his fingers, scolding herself under her breath. "Get it together," she whispered. "You're seeing things." But as she turned away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the routine she trusted, the silence she depended on, was no longer empty. It was watching. The breaking point didn't come during the long hours or the physical exhaustion. It came in the quiet. Naomi had finished cleaning the room when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She shouldn't have checked it, rules were strict, but she glanced anyway, expecting nothing important. Instead, it was a message she already knew how to read before she finished it. "You're really nice. I just don't feel the spark. Take care." She didn't reply. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and stood there for a moment, staring at the floor, letting the familiar weight settle into her chest. Another conversation that started hopeful and ended the same way. Another reminder that kindness was never enough to be chosen. Naomi sat in the chair across from Mr. Calderon, exhaustion pulling her shoulders forward. The mansion was quiet, guards stationed down the hall, the world outside moving on without her. "You know what's funny?" she said softly, not looking at him. "I talk to you more than anyone else." No response. Just silence. "I spend all day taking care of you, explaining things you can't see, telling you what's happening, and I don't even know if you hear me." She let out a tired laugh. "Guess that makes me pathetic, right?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Naomi pressed her palms into her knees, fighting the tightness in her throat. "People look at me and decide things before I open my mouth. They decide I'm too much, or not enough, too loud, too quiet, too invisible to matter." She swallowed hard. "I try so hard to be good, to be dependable, to show up every single day." Her eyes burned, but she didn't wipe them. "And it still feels like I'm standing in a room full of people who can't see me." She finally looked up at him. "You're the only one who never judged me," she whispered. "Because you don't look at me at all." A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. She brushed them away quickly, embarrassed, even though she believed she was alone in her pain. "I'm sorry," she said, standing abruptly. "You don't need to hear this. You've got enough going on." She turned her back to him, steadying herself with one hand on the dresser. Behind her, the room remained silent. Too silent. Naomi took a deep breath and forced herself to straighten up, unaware that something inside the man in the wheelchair had just fractured, because every word she spoke had landed exactly where it could do the most damage. The confirmation didn't come all at once. It came quietly. Naomi returned the next morning pretending nothing had happened. Same greeting. Same movements. Same careful narration of every step. She told herself the night before was just exhaustion, emotions spilling where they shouldn't have. Still, she watched him differently now. She paid attention to his breathing, to the angle of his head, to the way his eyes rested, not unfocused but waiting. Every instinct she'd ignored for months sat awake in her chest. When she finished preparing his medication, she knelt in front of him, close enough to hear the faint rhythm of his breath. "Mr. Calderon," she said softly, her heart pounding. "I need to ask you something." No reaction. "This is going to sound crazy." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But I need to know if I'm imagining things." She placed her hand gently over his right hand, the one she'd been watching the most. "Can you hear me?" Silence stretched between them. 1 second. 2. 3. The quiet grew heavy, suffocating. Naomi started to pull her hand away, shame rushing in when she felt it. A single movement. Not a twitch. Not a spasm. His pinky finger lifted, slow, deliberate, and settled back against her palm. Naomi froze. Her breath caught painfully in her chest as the world narrowed to that one impossible point of contact. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Afraid that even breathing too loudly might undo what had just happened. Did you just move? She whispered. Nothing else followed. His face remained still. His eyes blank. The perfect illusion restored. Naomi stumbled backward, her legs unsteady. Her mind raced, searching for explanations that didn't exist. Muscles didn't move like that by accident. Bodies didn't choose precision without awareness. You've been awake, she breathed. You've been listening. The realization settled over her like ice water. If he could hear her, if he could move, then everything she thought she knew was a lie. And the question that replaced it was far more terrifying. Why would a blind mafia boss pretend to be helpless for 12 years? The call came just before midnight. Naomi was halfway through reheating leftovers in her apartment when her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. Miss Carter, a man's voice said the moment she answered. Come. Too calm. This is estate security. You need to return immediately. Her stomach dropped. What's wrong? There's been a breach. Rival movement. We're initiating full lockdown. A pause. Mr. Calderon cannot be left alone. Naomi glanced at the clock. It's almost 12. A car is already outside, he interrupted. Bring enough for the night. Do not stop. Do not ask questions. The line went dead. 20 minutes later, she was back at the mansion. The gates closed behind her with a metallic finality she'd never heard before. Guards lined the corridors now, weapons visible, faces tight. The quiet she knew had been replaced by something sharp and electric. Fear dressed up as control. What's happening? Naomi asked as she was escorted down the hall. Rivals are testing us, a guard replied. This place is sealed until further notice. They led her to Mr. Calderon's wing and shut the heavy door behind her. The lock slid into place with a dull click that echoed louder than it should have. She was alone with him. Naomi stood still, pulse hammering, suddenly aware of how close the walls felt. The windows were shuttered. The lights dimmed. Outside the room, footsteps moved in slow, deliberate patterns. She turned to him slowly. He sat by the window as always, posture unchanged, face blank. But Naomi no longer saw a helpless man. She saw someone who had been watching, waiting, pretending. This is about you, she said quietly, moving closer. Someone's coming for you. No response. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second heavy with meaning. Midnight was approaching. Whatever game had been playing out for years was no longer hidden in silence. They were trapped together. And whatever secret he was keeping had just turned lethal. The mansion didn't sleep. Footsteps passed the door every few minutes. Radios murmured in low voices. Somewhere far below, a gate opened and closed again. Each sound reminded Naomi how little control she had, and how close the danger really was. She pulled a chair closer to Mr. Calderon and sat down, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't know what's happening out there, she said quietly. But I know this isn't random. Silence answered her. Naomi leaned forward, lowering her voice as if the walls might be listening. If someone's coming for you, then I deserve to know why. I deserve to know what I walked into. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out and rested one on the arm of his chair. Not touching him yet. Just close enough to feel the heat of his presence. You hurt me, she whispered. I know you did. The clock on the wall clicked over to midnight. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she saw it. A single tear slid from the corner of his eye, tracing a slow path down his cheek. Naomi's breath caught. She stood abruptly, heart pounding, and stepped closer. Oh my God! She reached out before she could stop herself, gently wiping the tear away with her thumb. His skin was warm. Real. Alive. His eyelids lowered slowly, deliberately, like a confession without words. Naomi didn't pull her hand back. Fear still coiled in her stomach, but something else pushed through it. Recognition. Connection. The understanding that whatever mask he wore, whatever lie he'd been living, the pain was real. I see you, she whispered. I don't know why you're hiding, but I know you're not empty. Her fingers curled around his hand. For the first time since she'd known him, his hand tightened around hers, just slightly, just enough to erase all doubt. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "You're here," she breathed. "You're really here." Outside the locked room, the threat waited. Inside, two people sat in the dark, holding on to each other as if the truth itself might keep them alive. The call came just before midnight. Naomi was halfway through reheating leftovers in her apartment when her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. "Miss Carter," a man's voice said the moment she answered. "Come." Too calm. "This is estate security. You need to return immediately." Her stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "There's been a breach. Rival movement. We're initiating full lockdown." A pause. "Mr. Calderon cannot be left alone." Naomi glanced at the clock. "It's almost 12. A car is already outside," he interrupted. "Bring enough for the night. Do not stop. Do not ask questions." The line went dead. 20 minutes later, she was back at the mansion. The gates closed behind her with a metallic finality she'd never heard before. Guards lined the corridors now, weapons visible, faces tight. The quiet she knew had been replaced by something sharp and electric. Fear dressed up as control. "What's happening?" Naomi asked as she was escorted down the hall. "Rivals are testing us," a guard replied. "This place is sealed until further notice." They led her to Mr. Calderon's wing and shut the heavy door behind her. The lock slid into place with a dull click that echoed louder than it should have. She was alone with him. Naomi stood still, pulse hammering, suddenly aware of how close the walls felt. The windows were shuttered. The lights dimmed. Outside the room, footsteps moved in slow, deliberate patterns. She turned to him slowly. He sat by the window as always, posture unchanged, face blank. But Naomi no longer saw a helpless man. She saw someone who had been watching, waiting, pretending. "This is about you," she said quietly, moving closer. "Someone's coming for you." No response. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second heavy with meaning. Midnight was approaching. Whatever game had been playing out for years was no longer hidden in silence. They were trapped together. And whatever secret he was keeping had just turned lethal. The mansion didn't sleep. Footsteps passed the door every few minutes. Radios murmured in low voices. Somewhere far below, a gate opened and closed again. Each sound reminded Naomi how little control she had, and how close the danger really was. She pulled a chair closer to Mr. Calderon and sat down, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't know what's happening out there," she said quietly. "But I know this isn't random." Silence answered her. Naomi leaned forward, lowering her voice as if the walls might be listening. "If someone's coming for you, then I deserve to know why. I deserve to know what I walked into." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out and rested one on the arm of his chair. Not touching him yet. Just close enough to feel the heat of his presence. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know you did." The clock on the wall clicked over to midnight. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she saw it. A single tear slid from the corner of his eye, tracing a slow path down his cheek. Naomi's breath caught. She stood abruptly, heart pounding, and stepped closer. "Oh my God!" She reached out before she could stop herself, gently wiping the tear away with her thumb. His skin was warm. Real. Alive. His eyelids lowered slowly, deliberately, like a confession without words. Naomi didn't pull her hand back. Fear still coiled in her stomach, but something else pushed through it. Recognition. Connection. The understanding that whatever mask he wore, whatever lie he'd been living, the pain was real. "I see you," she whispered. "I don't know why you're hiding, but I know you're not empty." Her fingers curled around his hand. For the first time since she'd known him, his hand tightened around hers, just slightly, just enough to erase all doubt. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "You're here," she breathed. "You're really here." Outside the locked room, the threat waited. Inside, two people sat in the dark, holding on to each other as if the truth itself might keep them alive. Morning came without sunlight. The shutters stayed closed. The guards outside hadn't moved. Whatever danger had passed during the night hadn't gone far. It was just waiting. Naomi hadn't slept. She sat across from Mr. Calderon, replaying every moment of the past 12 years with new eyes. Every silence. Every stillness. Every time she'd spoken freely because she believed no one was listening. "You owe me the truth," she said quietly. Not angry. Not afraid. Just steady. "If I'm trapped in here with you, I deserve to know who you really are." He didn't move. So Naomi stood and began to search the room. Not frantically. Not carelessly. With purpose. She opened drawers she'd never been allowed to touch. A locked cabinet she'd always been told was medical supplies only. Then the wall safe. One she knew the combination to because she'd heard it spoken once years ago, when everyone thought he was unconscious. Inside were stacks of documents, old photographs, and a leather-bound journal worn soft at the edges. Naomi picked it up slowly. The first pages were dates. Names. Transactions. Money moving in patterns that didn't make sense. Large sums leaving accounts tied to his organization and reappearing somewhere else. Shelters. Legal funds. Families whose names she didn't recognize. She turned the page. Photographs slipped out. A younger version of him, standing beside a woman with a bright smile. Another photo. Same woman, pale, lying in a hospital bed. A third. An infant wrapped in tubes and wires. Naomi's chest tightened. The journal entries that followed weren't neat. They were raw. Some pages were filled. Others held only a single line. "She's gone. They took everything. This life kills what it touches." Naomi looked up at him slowly. "You wanted to disappear," she whispered. "Not because you were weak, but because you were done." His jaw tightened. She kept reading. The entries changed after that. Detailed plans. Contingencies. Years mapped out in advance. Money rerouted. Allies planted quietly in places that mattered. Evidence gathered, piece by piece. "You let them think you were helpless," Naomi said, understanding dawning. "So they'd stop watching you. So you could tear it all down without becoming a target." He didn't deny it. "And you stayed invisible," she continued, voice softer now, "because visibility is what got everyone you loved killed." Her eyes fell back to the journal. Toward the back, the writing changed again. Her name appeared. Over and over. "Naomi." She closed the journal, hands shaking. "You watched me," she said, not accusing. "Just stating the truth. You heard everything. And you never stopped me. Never corrected me. Never let me know." His eyes met hers for the first time without hiding. Naomi swallowed. "You lied to me for 12 years. A beat. Why?" Slowly, painfully, his lips parted. To her surprise, a sound emerged. Not a word, but breath shaped by effort. "Because, if they believed you mattered to me," he whispered hoarsely, "they would have destroyed you." The room fell silent again. Naomi closed her eyes. He had lied. But not to use her. To protect her. The meeting was already underway when Naomi entered the room. She hadn't been invited. A guard had tried to stop her, but the raised voices carried down the hall. Angry, sharp, impatient. Names she'd only heard whispered over the years were now speaking openly, without fear. Men in tailored suits filled the space. Power sat at the table in human form. At the head of the room sat Mr. Calderon. Still in his wheelchair. Still silent. Still wearing the mask. "What is she doing here?" someone snapped the moment Naomi stepped inside. "She's his nurse," another voice scoffed. Or was. Naomi's stomach dropped. The accusations came fast. Money missing. Territories shrinking. Law enforcement getting too close. Someone said the word betrayal. Someone else laughed and said, 12 years of playing dead. Naomi looked at him, searching for any sign, any flicker that he would stop this. He didn't. "Funny thing," a man near the window said, leaning forward. "All that money started moving around the same time he stopped talking." Naomi's breath hitched. Another voice followed, crueler this time. "And who was sitting right beside him the whole time?" All eyes turned to her. "Don't," Naomi said quietly. "You're wrong." "You knew," the man pressed. "Didn't you? You helped him. Played the innocent nurse while he gutted us from the inside." She shook her head, panic flooding her chest. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't." No one listened. She turned back to Mr. Calderon, heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Tell them," she whispered. "Please. Just tell them." For a split second, their eyes met. And in his she saw it. Apology. Fear. Goodbye. He said nothing. The silence hit harder than any accusation. Naomi felt something inside her collapse. Of course this was how it ended. Of course she'd been the fool. The invisible woman who mistook proximity for meaning. Kindness for connection. Silence for safety. "Get her out of here," someone ordered. "Before she causes more damage." A guard grabbed her arm. Naomi didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just looked at him one last time. 12 years of care. Of words spoken into silence. Of believing she mattered to someone who had been watching the whole time. And he let her walk away believing none of it was real. As the door closed behind her, Naomi realized something worse than betrayal had happened. She had trusted him. And he chose silence over her. Naomi didn't plan to go back. She sat alone in her apartment, lights off, the city humming outside like nothing had happened. 12 years reduced to a single silence. A single choice that told her exactly where she stood. Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She let it ring twice before answering. "Miss Carter," a familiar voice said. Low, urgent. One of the senior guards. "You need to listen carefully. The vote happens tonight." Her chest tightened. "What vote?" "To remove him," the man said. "Permanent. He won't fight it." He refused to speak. Naomi closed her eyes. "He thinks letting you walk away keeps you safe," the guard continued. "But if he stays silent at midnight, there won't be anything left to protect." The line went dead. Naomi stood there for a long moment, heart racing, every instinct screaming at her to stay away. To protect herself. To accept that she'd been used. But beneath the pain was something louder. The truth. She grabbed her coat. The mansion was darker than she'd ever seen it. Most of the guards were gone now, reassigned, watching other exits. The halls echoed as Naomi moved through them, each step louder than the last. The clock outside his room read 11:57 p.m. She opened the door without knocking. Mr. Calderon sat alone, facing the window, exactly as he always had. The same chair. The same posture. The same lie. "You're really going to let them kill you," Naomi said quietly, closing the door behind her. "And let me believe I never mattered." He didn't turn. She stepped closer, anger and grief tangled tight in her chest. "You don't get to decide that for me. You don't get to erase 12 years with silence." The clock ticked. 11:58. "I know why you stayed quiet," she said, voice shaking now. "I know you think disappearing is the same as protecting. But all you're doing is choosing fear again." She moved in front of him, forcing him to face her. "I don't want safety built on lies," Naomi said. "I want truth, even if it costs us everything." The clock changed. 11:59. For a moment, she thought he would let it end that way. Then he inhaled. Slow. Shaking. Like a man who hadn't used his voice in years. His head lifted. And for the first time, fully, unmistakably, he looked straight at her. "I stayed silent," he said, each word torn from deep inside, "because loving you was the one thing this life couldn't afford." Naomi froze. "But silence didn't save you," he continued hoarsely. "It only made me a coward." The clock clicked. Midnight. He turned his chair toward her and spoke the words she would never forget. "I see you," he said. "I always have. And if this is the end, I choose you." Naomi's breath left her in a sob. 12 years of invisibility shattered in a single sentence. The room stayed quiet after midnight. Not the heavy, controlled silence Naomi had lived inside for 12 years, but a different kind. Fragile. Exposed. Honest. Footsteps echoed down the hall. The door opened. Men rushed in, voices overlapping, orders half-spoken, then stopping cold. Because Mr. Calderon was standing. Not unsteady. Not supported. Standing on his own 2 feet beside Naomi, his hand wrapped tightly around hers. For a moment, no one moved. "You were wrong about one thing," he said calmly, his voice stronger now. "I wasn't helpless. I was patient." The consequences came quickly after that. Documents were released. Accounts frozen. Deals exposed. The organization didn't collapse overnight, but it fractured beyond repair. Some men walked away. Others were taken quietly by authorities who had been waiting for years. Mr. Calderon disappeared before dawn. So did Naomi. They didn't take the mansion. They didn't take the money. They didn't take the name. 6 months later, Naomi woke to sunlight instead of silence. No guards. No gates. No routines carved into stone. Just the sound of waves outside a small house she never thought she'd own, and footsteps behind her, unhurried, real. "You're up early," he said. She smiled without turning around. Old habits. He joined her at the window, resting his chin lightly against her shoulder. "Still feels strange," he admitted. "Being seen." Naomi reached for his hand, the same one that had once stayed perfectly still. "You don't have to disappear anymore." He squeezed her fingers. "Neither do you." They stood there together, watching the morning arrive, no secrets left between them. Before stepping outside, he paused and looked at her. "You know what saved me?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Not hiding," he said. "Not control. Not silence." A small smile touched his mouth. "It was you. Seeing me when I didn't deserve it." Naomi met his eyes. "I see you," she said, just as he had. And this time, when they walked inside, it wasn't into darkness or lies. It was into a life where neither of them had to pretend they didn't exist.